When I was a sophomore in high school, there used to be this kid called Brendan that everyone took a dislike to. He used to think he was some kind of bully and that people were scared of him, but the truth of the matter was, most people just didn't like him. At school, we were made to do regular lockdown drills as a precaution, and these were always scary, as when you stopped to think about it, it made you realize that school wasn't always a safe place to be, and any day could be your last. Today was just like any other drill day. The sirens sound, the announcement comes over the speakers, the teacher locks the door, and we all sit down at the back of the room, out of sight, with our backs against the wall. As we did this, Brendan just stood there in the middle of the classroom. Our history teacher, Mr. Cleaver, called Brendan to come and sit down. Brendan reached behind him as if he was going to take something out of his back pocket and pulled out a handgun. He stood there and pointed the gun right at Mr. Cleaver and told him to turn and face the wall. Mr. Cleaver did as he was asked. Brendan then pointed the gun at me and told me to stand up and face the wall, and one by one, he made everyone stand and face the wall and then place our hands on our heads. As this was during a practice drill, no one outside the class even knew this was going on, and no one was coming to our aid. Brendan started talking about how people should be careful about how they treat the quiet kid.
"What's the saying? The quiet ones are usually the worst?"
He laughed.
"Well, you're about to find out exactly what that means."
Just as he said that, the alarms and announcements stopped, and to everyone else, a normal school day resumed. Generally, the principal would come round after the drill had finished to find out how we did. The teacher would give feedback if there were any improvements that needed to be made, or if anyone acted out of line. When the principal arrived at our classroom, it took him a few attempts of him checking the door and telling us the lockdown was over before he realized the situation. You could hear his shoes echoing as he ran down the hallway. There was both a sigh of relief and panic that came over me. Then the sirens started sounding again, and an announcement came over the speakers.
"Full lockdown. This is not a drill. Full lockdown. This is not a drill."
Up until now, I think most of us locked in the classroom had managed to remain calm, but hearing the announcement just seemed to bring the situation more into reality. A few of my classmates started to whimper and sob the longer time went on, the more you started to think the worst was going to happen. Brendan didn't really say anything. He didn't have any demands or want anything from anyone. I could hear him pacing behind us while we all stood there with our faces pressed against the wall. Brendan slapped something on the desk. I'm not sure what it was, but it made us all jump. At first I thought he had shot someone, and I think we all had the same thought. You could hear him snigger as those of us that were whimpering now started to cry and begged to be saved and let go. We could hear the sound of the police driving up the school entrance. And as we did, Brendan ordered Mr. Cleaver to back up slowly and turn and approach him. Then he told us all to turn around and face him with our hands still on our heads. Brendan stood there pointing the gun right between the teacher's eyes. We were all about to witness Mr. Cleaver getting shot. Out of nowhere, Brendan slowly placed the gun in front of Mr. Cleaver. There was some hesitation, but then Mr. Cleaver swiped the gun from the desk, and Brendan just stood there with this huge grin on his face. We all continued to stand with our hands on our heads, not knowing if it was safe enough to move yet. For all we knew, Brendan could have had another gun. Mr. Cleaver moved towards the door, never taking his eyes off Brendan. He unlocked and then opened the door. As the police moved into the hall, Mr. Cleaver slid the gun into the hall with his foot and shouted that the gunman had been disarmed. Mr. Cleaver was put in cuffs as a formality, and as the police entered the room, we all pointed to Brendan. Brendan was arrested, and we never saw him in school after that. I'm not sure what the lesson he was trying to teach us was, but our parents were later informed that the gun was only a replica and couldn't actually shoot bullets. As scary as it was, Brendan never intended to hurt any of us. Not physically, anyway. This took place only a year ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in class approximately 40 minutes into second period when there was a loud explosion, which sounded like it was somewhere in the building. The walls rumbled and the windows shook. The whole class jumped like a flash mob, doing a shoulder shrug, and sat there looking at each other, trying to understand what was going on. We all started to grab our bags and jackets, thinking we were going to be evacuated for a bomb threat or fire, when the announcement came through the loudspeaker, telling us we were going into a full lockdown and to remain inside the classroom. This confused most of us, including myself. Why were we going into lockdown when it sounded like there was an explosion? You know what usually follows explosions? Fire. I didn't want to be stuck in a building with fire. A few of us started asking the teacher and shouting as to why we were being locked in when we should be evacuating. Miss Martin's answer was simple. Maybe they know something we don't. That actually made sense. We didn't know what was happening or why there was an explosion. There could be a bigger threat from us leaving the room. Miss Martin followed protocol, locking the door, and pulled down a blind covering the glass window and told us all to move to the back of the class, which we did. Shortly after we had all sat down on the floor, we heard one of the main doors to the building slam closed. These were heavy fire doors, and our classroom was the first classroom down the hall from these doors. But the question was that someone coming in or someone going out? We all just sat there in near silence, looking at each other, trying to understand what was happening, when a faint whistling started making its way down the hall. The whistling reminded me of Negan from The Walking Dead, a long, droning whistle with only a slight variation of tone. We could hear it getting closer to our classroom as it became louder and louder, and just as it sounded like it was right outside our classroom door, it stopped. Someone then tried the doorknob. They started to shake the door and started banging on it as if kicking it aggressively from outside while they shook it back and forth. We all sat there clasping onto each other. I had 2 girl classmates sitting on either side of me, holding my hands. They were comforting me as much as I was comforting them. The door sounded like it could give way any minute, and then it stopped. The girl to my left, Katie, let out a scream and pointed to the door to see an eye peering through a small gap in the side of the blind. We all sat up in a panic, and then whoever it was just walked away whistling as they made their way down the hall. We didn't hear anything else until about 30 minutes later, when an announcement came through the speaker system saying the lockdown was over. By this time, all of the emergency services had arrived at school. I don't think they ever caught the man. I do know that no one was able to get a look at him and give a clear description. He covered his face for the cameras, as if he knew where they all were, so other than build, size, and clothing, the police knew nothing about him. There were rumors saying that it was an ex-student coming back to seek revenge on a teacher, but no one really knows. The explosion was caused by a gas can being put in a dumpster outside and being set alight. Some said the explosion was to make us all evacuate, so we would all run into the line of fire of him attacking us as we left. Lockdowns are scary, and most kids probably won't ever experience a real lockdown. But for me, I'll never forget mine. As far as lockdowns go, across the nation we're taught to lock doors, turn off lights, hide at the back of the class, or hide under the table. But what happens if a lockdown happens when you're not in class? It's all down to you. You need to have your wits about you and try to apply common sense of where to hide. This is life or death. I'm a female, and I needed to be excused from class and was given a hall pass. I was heading towards the bathroom when that dreaded sound came through the school tannoy saying lockdown was now in place. We were usually forewarned about drills, but not always, so it was hard to know whether to take it seriously or not. For anyone listening, always take it seriously. I decided the smartest thing for me to do was to hide in the girls' locker room, which was the closest room for me to get to, and had a bathroom towards the back. I hid in one of the stalls there. I had left my phone in my backpack in class, so I couldn't even text anyone to find out what was going on, or if it was safe to go back to class. I sat there, waiting patiently, when someone else entered the locker room. They seemed to pace around a bit, checking lockers, and then came into the bathroom. I could see the shadow under the door as I tried to be as quiet as possible and not to make any sound. Whoever it was, then went into the stall next to mine. I was shaking. I had no idea who this was, or if this was a drill or not. After a couple of minutes, I heard a male voice come from the stall next to me. "Hello?" I wasn't sure if I should answer or not, but I think it was obvious I was there, as I couldn't help but shuffle my feet and move my bum to stop it going numb. I decided to answer.
Hey, who is this? Do you know what's going on?
"My name's Kyle. I'm not sure, just stay here and stay quiet." I felt somewhat safer knowing there was someone else in there with me and looking out for me. I then heard the distant creak of the door hinge as the door to the main locker room opened. I placed my hands over my mouth and lifted my feet off the floor and closed my eyes and just sat there. I could hear footsteps walking around. It sounded like there was more than one person, and then it went quiet. After a minute or two, I asked Kyle,
Do you think it's safe to go out now?
Kyle didn't answer. I whispered his name 3 or 4 times, and then I heard some commotion coming from the locker room. It sounded like someone being thrown against the lockers and taken to the floor. Another member of staff came in shouting my name. I had been reported as missing from class, and they were sent to look for me.
It's safe. You can come out now.
As I came out of the stall and into the locker room, they had some guy face down on the floor. He looked at me out of the corner of his eye and said, "Hi, I'm Kyle. Nice to meet you." My stomach dropped when I realized the person I was supposed to be hiding from was right there with me. My parents were called, and I was later questioned by police, but we were never told anything as a result of the arrest or why he was there. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing.